Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. Tonight, we are gathered in a clearing in the heart of an enchanted forest, and we have many stories to listen to and things to discover. So, without further ado, let's begin with the first story, one from Ireland that was put in writing in the Middle Ages but appeared centuries earlier. The story of Deirdre of the Sorrows. Once upon a time, a king ruled over Ulster. His name was Cú Chulainn, Cú, son of Ness. And at his court, Evin Maha, lived the royal storyteller, the royal bard, Féilimid Macdo. One day, Féilimid had a daughter, Deirdre, and as usual for newborns, prophecies were made. The chief druid prophesied that Deirdre would grow up to be a very beautiful woman, one whose charm would be almost irresistible, but that much blood would be shed because of her. Kings and lords would go to war, and the greatest warriors of Ulster would be forced into exile for her sake. The prophecy terrified the court, and many urged Féilimid the bard to kill the baby before it became a reality. Féilimid didn't know what to do, but the king chose for him. The announcement that Deirdre would be one of the most desirable women in the world had aroused him. So he decided to keep the child for himself. He would let her grow up and marry her later, when she would be of age. Cú the king, guided by lust, hid Deirdre. The infant was entrusted to a poet, a wise woman named Lugh, who lived in seclusion in the woodlands and never received any visitors. Away from the court and society, only in the company of Lugh, Deirdre grew up happily, and the first part of the prophecy seemed to become reality. As years passed, she turned into a beautiful child, and then a delicate and irresistible young woman. One day in winter, as an immaculate blanket of snow covered the forest, Deirdre saw a raven landing in the snow with its prey, and was astounded by the colors. She told Lugh that one day she would love a man with the same colors she had seen. Hair as dark as the raven, skin as white as snow, and cheeks as red as blood. Lugh had become very attached to Deirdre, whom she now regarded as her daughter. After all these years, when the joy and affection of the girl had softened her lonely existence, she told Deirdre that the man she described existed. She was describing Naoise, a handsome young hunter, warrior, and singer who lived at Áin Maha at the court of King Cú. Disobeying the orders of the king, the old woman helped her young protege meet the man of her dreams. As soon as Deirdre and Naoise met, they fell in love and realized that life would be meaningless if they couldn't spend it together. Naoise could count on his two brothers. Together they were the three greatest warriors of Ulster, and together they made plans to escape the country and travel to Scotland, where Deirdre and Naoise would be able to live together, far from the reach of King Cahor. And so it was done. The four escaped on a boat and soon reached Scotland. They lived a happy life there. They fished and hunted to eat. They saw magnificent places, and this simple life was enough to fulfill their dreams of happiness, because love and the joy of being together nourished them every minute of every hour of every day. They didn't think about it, but the prophecy had said, when Deirdre was born, that the greatest warriors of Ulster would be forced into exile. And so it had happened. Back at the court of Ulster, the king had been humiliated, and his fury did not diminish. So he resolved to take revenge and get back the woman he had decided would be his. He sent a royal courtier with an invitation for the three brothers and Deirdre to return, with a promise of safe passage home. The brothers had not forgotten their sense of duty, despite their exile in Scotland, and they accepted the offer, confident that the king would not dare imprison or harm people he had personally invited. How wrong they were, because Cahor's anger had made him forget honesty and the laws of hospitality. As the news of their return reached Ulster, the king sent Leabharm, the old woman who had raised Deirdre, to spy on the travelers with the mission to tell him whether Deirdre's beauty was still intact. The old woman tried to protect Deirdre and came back reporting that her protege had aged and was now ugly. But it was a lie. Deirdre's beauty had only bloomed during her stay in Scotland, and the king knew it, because he didn't trust the old woman and had sent another spy to check on her. Deirdre, Naoise, and his two brothers were lodging at a house when the king sent his soldiers to attack, with orders to bring Deirdre back alive. As the king's troops attacked their shelter, the three brothers fought with all their strength, and many of their enemies died. The prophecy had announced that much blood would be shed because of Deirdre, and much blood was indeed shed this day, even though it was lust and anger from the king that were responsible. Despite their bravery and their strength, Naoise and his brothers could not contain an entire enemy, and they were indeed overwhelmed. Naoise was killed by a spear, and his brothers shortly after him. After the death of Naoise and the capture of Deirdre, Cahor took her as his wife. Deirdre's body was still alive, but something was dead inside her. Something had died with her only love. Silent and sad, she let each day pass without noticing the heat or the cold, the joy or the sadness of others around her. Weeks made of days that felt all the same passed, then months made of weeks that felt all the same too. After a year, Cahor could no longer bear Deirdre's coldness and contempt that reminded him every day of what he had done and prevented him from enjoying the company of his wife. all the more so that sorrow only enhanced her beauty and made her more attractive than ever. He asked her who she hated the most in the world besides him, and she said it was the man who killed Naoise with his spear. Cahor replied that he would then give her to this man, so that he would be freed from her, and she would pay the price of her coldness. As she was being taken to her future spouse on a chariot, the king taunted her. This was more than she could bear, and so she threw herself from the chariot against a rock, finally finding deliverance through death. Deirdre was no more. The curse of her beauty was finally accomplished. I told you earlier that this story is from Ireland. It is taken from the Ulster Cycle, one of several cycles of Irish heroic legends. There are 4 main ones, and the Ulster Cycle alone comprises 80 different stories. Irish mythology is only one aspect of Celtic mythology. There was a time when Celtic peoples covered a large part of Europe, from Eastern Europe to Spain and Great Britain and Ireland. So who were the Celts? What happened to them? What did they believe in? What gods? What myths? How did this heritage reach us or get lost sometimes? These are some of the topics we will touch on tonight, and of course there will be many more stories from the mythology of Celtic nations where this cultural heritage lasted longer and had profound influence in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and parts of England like Cornwall and Brittany in the west of France. Before we continue with our stories, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. If you join our Patreon, which is possible for as little as $3, £3, or €3 a month, you will gain access to 15 exclusive episodes, and we add a new one every month. And you can listen and download all these episodes with and without background sounds. You also get advanced releases on Fridays instead of Sundays, surveys, and obviously, this is the best way to let us know your feedback, requests, and wishes about Lights Out Library. And regardless of what you can pitch in, everyone gets all we offer. Because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. You will find a link in the description of the episode. Before we dive deep into our story, let's take a moment to relax and settle our thoughts. If you wish to, you may close your eyes and immerse yourself in the story. Assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath. And when you slowly exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. So let's return to our topic and more Celtic stories. What is Celtic mythology? It is almost as if there were several because the religions and beliefs of the Celts were not unified. In some regions, they lasted much longer than in others, The golden age of the Celts across Europe was during the Iron Age in the first millennium BC. The Celts were a collection of peoples with related languages and many common cultural traits too. They descended from migrants who had arrived centuries earlier from the east. They were one of the numerous European peoples believed to have spread from Ukraine and the north of the Caucasus to all of Europe and as far south as Persia and India, the cradle of their specific European culture. At least the most ancient parts that archaeology has revealed was in a large region that extended through eastern France, southern Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Over several centuries, they expanded as far east as Romania and even the center of Anatolia in modern Turkey, and as far west as Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, and Ireland. In the first centuries of Rome, the Roman Republic was under serious threat from the Celts settled in northern Italy. But after reaching their peak by the middle of the first millennium BC, the cultural area of the Celts began to shrink. They faced two main competitors for space. From the east came another Indo-European group, the Germanic peoples, who progressively advanced westward, reaching the Rhine River and Scandinavia. In all the previously Celtic regions east of the Rhine, Celtic culture was replaced with Germanic culture. The second threat came from the south, the expansion of Rome to Spain, France, Belgium, and Great Britain also shrank considerably the regions dominated by Celtic peoples. They stayed where their ancestors had lived for generations, but their culture did not always resist the might of Rome. Besides its military and economic might, Rome was also a cultural power that transformed the societies it conquered. So about 2,000 years ago, after the Germanic and Roman waves of expansion, the areas where Celtic culture remained dominant were limited to the fringes of Europe, or the margins of the Roman Empire. Scotland in the northern of Great Britain, Wales, which was occupied by the Romans, but where Romanization was not as intense as in England and Spain or in Gaul, allowing the language and many traditions to survive 3 centuries of occupation. Some parts of England, like Cornwall and Ireland, which remained free of Roman presence. The Celtic area re-expanded later, just a bit, with the migration of Celtic Britons, especially to the south of the region of Brittany, but we will return to that later. Speaking of Ireland, let's dive into another story from the Ulster Cycle. This is the story of Cú Chulainn, a legendary demigod, the son of Lugh, a god from the Tuatha De Danann, which we will discuss later, and therefore immortal. His mother was the sister of the king of Ulster, Cú Chulainn, whom we have just seen as the villain in the story of Deirdre. The life of Cú Chulainn was filled with extraordinary deeds and miracles, starting with his birth. There are several versions of it, but here is one. His mother, Deirdre, was the sister of the king of Ulster. One day, she accompanied him and a group of nobles to hunt a flock of magical birds. Snow began to fall, and they had to look for shelter. They found a house nearby where only a couple lived, and the woman was pregnant and about to give birth. The night of their arrival, she gave birth, and Deirdre assisted in the delivery. It was a baby boy. In the barn near the house, a mare also gave birth to twin colts. The Ulster men camped around the house that could not accommodate them all. The next morning, when everyone woke up, the house and the barn had disappeared, and their occupants were nowhere to be found. Only the child and the colts remained. This was obviously magic at work, perhaps a divine intervention, and the boy could not be abandoned. So Deirdre took him home and began raising him as her own. But the boy fell ill shortly after, and he died. As Deirdre was mourning the child, the god Lugh appeared to her and revealed that he was their host that night. He had seen how she started raising the child and decided that she should be the mother of his son. He also told her that he had already placed his child in her womb and that she should call him Setanta when he would be born. Then Lugh disappeared, leaving Deirdre to her dismay. Months passed, and Deirdre's pregnancy became more evident each day, which turned into a scandal, as she was promised but not yet married to a warrior of the court. Deirdre explained herself, revealing the nature of the child she was carrying. The entire court of Ulster, Awin Maha, was filled with wonder. When Deirdre gave birth to the child, he was named Setanta, as ordered by Lugh. The nobles of Ulster argued for the honor of being his foster father. The dispute was settled by deciding that several of them would be foster parents, so that the miraculous child would be the son of the entire Awin Maha. The king himself and several other noble men and women would teach him judgment, eloquent speech, morals, poetry, and arts, providing for him and nursing him until he would become the extraordinary hero he was promised to be. Several years passed, and Setanta grew up. He became a healthy and brave child. There was a group of children at Awin Maha, a boy troupe that played and trained together. Even though he was still a small child, Setanta begged his foster parents to join them. But he didn't know that the custom was for newcomers to ask for the boy's protection before joining the group. He ran into the playing field without asking. The boys took this as a challenge and attacked him. He seemed to stand no chance against a dozen boys older than him. But as they started fighting, he suddenly had a battle frenzy and beat them all single-handedly. Cahur arrived and put a stop to the fight. He cleared the misunderstanding, and Setanta accepted to ask for the boy's protection. Not that he needed it, apparently, but as soon as he got it, he began to chase after them, demanding they all put themselves under his protection, revealing that not only was he an extraordinary fighter, he also had innate authority and leadership. Cahur had noted the boy's exploits and kept an appreciative and protective eye on him. It happened one day that a smith called Cú Chulainn invited the king to a feast at his house. Before going, the king went to the playing field where the boys were playing the traditional game of hurling. He was so impressed with Setanta's performance on the field that he asked him to join him at the feast when the game would be over. Setanta agreed, and the king went to Chulainn's house. But he forgot to tell his host that the boy would arrive later. As all the guests had arrived, Chulainn let loose his hound to protect the house. The hound was enormous and ferocious, so much so that the whole neighborhood was afraid of him and would never have approached the house when it was guarding it. But Setanta couldn't know this, and when he arrived at the house to join the feast as ordered by the king, the beast attacked him. A beast 3 times heavier than him, with powerful jaws and big teeth. A fight ensued, and Setanta had to kill the hound in self-defense. Everyone in the house was alarmed by the noise. When they exited, they saw the dead hound and understood what had happened. Chulainn was devastated by the loss of his hound, so Setanta promised he would find a replacement, and until the puppy would be old enough to do the job, he would guard Chulainn's house himself. And so it was done. From this moment on, the Druids decided that Setanta's name would now be Cú Chulainn, Chulainn's hound. In another episode of Cú Chulainn's childhood, it happened one day at Áin Maha that the young boy overheard the Druid teaching his pupils. One of them had asked what that particular day was auspicious for, and the Druid was now making a prophecy. He answered that any warrior who would take arms this day would accomplish such deeds that he would gain everlasting fame. Cú Chulainn was only 7, but the promise of everlasting fame and extraordinary accomplishments seduced him immediately. He went to the king and asked for arms. He was given several weapons, but none of them could withstand his strength. So the king himself gave him his own weapons, which were the finest and strongest of Ulster, and they were perfect for Cú Chulainn. But as they were conversing, the Druid arrived and grieved because he had not finished his prophecy when Cú Chulainn had run to the king. The warrior who took arms that day would indeed be famous forever, but his life would be short, and so it became clear to all that Cú Chulainn would be a hero, but that his fate would probably be tragic. The boy was still young, and not the kind to be discouraged by the sayings of an old man. Soon afterward, upset by the way people kept talking about his prophecy at Áin Maha, he asked the king for a chariot. Time had come to accomplish great deeds. He set off on a foray and attacked 3 brothers, 3 warriors, enemies of the kingdom of Ulster, who used to boast that they had killed more Ulstermen than anyone else. He entered into one of his battle rages and easily defeated his enemies. But then he returned to Áin Maha, to the court of Ulster, still in this state of battle frenzy. He didn't know his friends or foes when he was in this rage, and the Ulster men were afraid that he would slaughter them all. By chance, The queen who led the women at Owen Maha had an idea. She ordered the women to bare their breasts to him. This unexpected but arousing display caught Cú Chulainn off guard, and he was distracted. The Ulstermen took the opportunity to wrestle him into a barrel of cold water, but the heat from his body was such that the barrel exploded in a cloud of steam. They put him in a second barrel, and this time the water only boiled. And then a third barrel, and this time the water only warmed to a pleasant temperature. The crisis was averted for now. Before we go on with the story of Cú Chulainn, let's take a look at the connection between Irish, Scottish, and Welsh mythology with their Celtic roots, and why it is mainly through them that we have access to stories that were sometimes born more than 2,000 years ago. For the Celts, in close contact with Rome, and where the empire stayed in place longer, their myths and religion did not survive this period of several centuries. The ancient Celtic religion was abandoned. Knowledge of the mythology from Spain or Gaul is known mainly through contemporary Roman and Christian sources, of which there are very few. As mentioned before, only a few Celtic peoples maintained their linguistic identity and political independence. The Gaels in Highland Scotland, the Welsh in Wales, and the Celtic Britons of southern England. Later, many Britons crossed the Channel to Brittany in western France and revived Celtic culture there, against the general trend of weakening Celtic culture. It is in these regions of Europe that Celtic culture and mythology lived on for several more centuries and left a much stronger trace. However, the ancient Celtic religion was finally almost erased in the Middle Ages by Christianization. Paradoxically, some of these nations that adopted Christianity later than many other parts of Europe became intensely Christian. Ireland and Brittany became strongholds of Christianity in the Middle Ages. Celtic culture did not entirely disappear, of course. It remained in languages, tales, and folklore. But the old religion was largely erased. Erased, but not entirely forgotten, as the Middle Ages was the period when this agonizing ancestral mythology was put into writing. Much precious information was preserved and transmitted by monks. As centuries passed through the Middle Ages, these nations generally maintained their independence. Scotland, Ireland, even though it was not unified, and Brittany continued, with Wales being the exception, as it was politically attached to England but always maintained its sense of individuality. In the Renaissance and modern times, however, these small nations fell into the orbit of their bigger neighbors and lost their independence. Brittany was annexed by France in the 16th century. Scotland shared kings with England until the Acts of Union in 1707 that created a single kingdom of Great Britain. Ireland, which had been in a personal union with England since the 16th century, meaning they had the same sovereign, joined Great Britain in 1801. These unions were always faced with local resistance from part of the population. But if you had asked a Scot, an Irishman, or a French citizen of Brittany what their identity was 2,000 years ago, they would have never said they were from a Celtic nation. The Celtic period was little known, almost entirely forgotten across the population, and it was not a meaningful political reference at the time. There was, of course, a sense of identity and difference based on the language, based on traditions, and a long history of independence. But what people had in mind was history since the Middle Ages. The antiquity or the pre-Christian period was not important. It was little known, vaguely barbaric and pagan, so nothing to be proud of or build a respectable identity on in societies at the time that were still very Christian. The folklore and tales that were told and passed from one generation to the next were very much alive and a part of people's lives. They still contained many Celtic pre-Christian elements, but these were not necessarily distinguished from later additions. And then came the 19th century and the Celtic Revival, a renewed interest in the national history that happened in pretty much all European countries. There was a Norse or a Viking revival, a Germanic revival, and a Celtic revival. The curiosity of scholars and the public for pre-Christian and pre-Roman times increased dramatically. Archaeology, languages, myths, and legends all became much more popular, and part of the national identity in many European countries became linked to these ancestors and their culture, which was technically accurate but also a choice, because there were other possible ancestors from before. The Celts had the advantage of being better known. This was very important as a factor, and having lived long enough in these lands to be considered like the founding people, it was also very useful politically to create a sense of national unity. The governments did not discourage and often promoted this way of telling national history. This was when the French started to be taught in schools that their ancestors were the Gauls. So, regarding the Celtic aspects of these 19th century revivals, this is when the various notions or regions that consider themselves Celtic today began to adopt the term. A century earlier, they wouldn't have. And the Celtic revival changed their own perception of their history. It is a chosen identity, but one that makes sense because indeed there is a major Celtic heritage that is not only based on DNA. The local languages, the folklore, the names of places, and the historical roots of this sense of national identity that distinguish them from their neighbors all can be traced back to the Celtic period. Now, one difficulty when it comes to the source of mythology is to distinguish what is from the original body of myth and religious beliefs that the ancient Celts had, and what has been added later by Roman or Christian authors who put mythology in writing. In popular culture, things can easily get mixed up. One example of this is the Celtic cross, which features a ring that unites its 4 branches. It is quite ancient, appearing in the early Middle Ages in Ireland, Great Britain, and France, but it appeared as a Christian symbol. There is no example of crosses like these made by the Celts before their conversion to Christianity. They used symbols like circles with branches that could possibly have inspired Celtic crosses. But all the high crosses that can be seen across Celtic regions date from the Middle Ages, or after 1850, with the Celtic revival. Yet many people believe that these crosses are ancient Celtic symbols. They can be called symbols of Celtic Christianity, but not of an ancient Celtic paganism. The same applies to stone circles, the most famous being Stonehenge. There are plenty across Western France, Great Britain, Spain, and Ireland. Celtic Druids may have used these circles, but they date from before the Celtic period. They are actually much older. I do have a story that talks about Stonehenge. If this interests you, you can find it in my library. So even though details may have been changed, and time probably altered them, the stories that were written in the Middle Ages in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, parts of England, and Brittany are the closest things that we have at our disposal to original Celtic myths. I mentioned earlier that the Ulster Cycle contains 80 different stories. The Ulster Cycle, but it is only a section of Irish mythology, one that centers on the north of Ireland. There is also the Fenian Cycle, or Finn Cycle, which centers on a hero called Finn MacColl and a group of his warriors, the Fianna. There is another set of tales about the Tuatha, the group of godlike peoples said to have arrived in Ireland in ancestral times. This one is called the mythological cycle. And yet another division is the cycle of the kings that contained stories of legendary kings of Ireland. A lot of Irish mythology is shared with Scotland, and in multiple stories characters travel between them. Apart from Ireland and Scotland, there are Welsh, Cornish, and English and Breton mythology that share stories or details, but are independent bodies in their own right. This abundance contrasts with continental Celtic mythology apart from Brittany, which was entirely lost. From Gaul or Spain, we know close to nothing of the myths that were transmitted by oral tradition. Pretty much all we have are the names of several gods that were worshipped, either across the Celtic world or locally. So now let's examine what we know of these deities and Celtic Pantheon. Among the gods and goddesses that transcended tribal boundaries and regions, there were a few notable ones. The Matres, Cernunnos, Taranis, the sky god, and Epona, the horse goddess. They were probably known under different names depending on the regions, but traces of their cult have been found across the ancient Celtic world. The Matres were female deities worshipped in northwestern Europe. They were always depicted in groups of 3. Their function is little known, but they had a large following that coexisted with Roman gods during the first centuries in Gaul and northern Italy. Interestingly, this motive of triple goddesses was very widespread in ancient Europe. The Romans had the Parcae, the female personifications of destiny. The Greeks had the three fates. The Norse had the Norns, always appearing in threes. In Irish mythology, there is the Morrigan. We will discuss this triple goddess later. It is believed that this triple goddess motive has an Indo-European origin, since all these peoples were Indo-Europeans. Cernunnos is another well-known figure. The name serves for many examples of probably the same god with antlers. Cernunnos was depicted sitting cross-legged and usually holding a torque, which is a large, rigid, or stiff necklace. Cernunnos was venerated intensely across Gaul and Spain, and probably had at least an equivalent in Great Britain and Ireland. But his precise identity or significance in ancient Celtic religion remains unknown. So it has been supposed that he could have been a god of animals, nature, and fertility. Taranis was the god of the sky and thunder. Beyond Gaul in Britain and Ireland too, traces of his cult from before Germanic migrations have been found far to the east along the Danube River. In Gaul, he was syncretized, that is to say, merged or associated with Jupiter, the Roman god. Taranis was referred to by Roman authors as part of a triad of major Gallic gods, the other two being Esus and Tutatis. Tutatis's cult was widespread in Gaul and Britain, and it seems he was a protector god that tribes invoked to defend themselves from foes or disasters. Another goddess worshipped throughout the Celtic world was Epona, a protector of horses associated with fertility. Contrary to other Celtic gods that remained local after the Roman invasion and saw their influence diminish, Epona had success abroad. Her cult spread to other parts of the Roman Empire, and she even had a cult in Rome. The lands occupied by the Celts also had one or several healing deities each, often associated with thermal springs. Belinus in northern Italy and Gaul, Borvo in parts of Portugal, and Bridget in Ireland. Bridget was a goddess of fire and light, but in some stories is presented as one who intervenes to heal warriors. In Great Britain, many wells were dedicated to a goddess whom the Romans called Minerva, though that was certainly not what the Celts called her. In the city of Bath, the goddess associated with the thermal springs was called Sulis. This is an example of a local deity. There were hundreds, if not thousands of them, and the cult of Sulis merged with that of Minerva in the Romano-British period. Other gods were associated with the sun. Lugh, the father of Cú Chulainn in Irish mythology. A goddess called Green, another called Aine, and Belinus in Gaul. The truth is that it is very hard, if not impossible, to understand precisely what deities were associated across the Celtic world, which was diverse. Probably no one could have had a precise understanding of the various pantheons in each region, even at the time. In total, the Celts may have had thousands of gods. For most of them, their names are not even known and will probably stay forgotten because no one ever wrote about them. But we are going to see some of these gods and courtiers intervene in their Irish iteration along the story of Cú Chulainn. So let's resume it. We had left Cú Chulainn as a child after the prophecy that announced his fate and his first martial exploit. Several years had passed, and Cú Chulainn had become handsome as he turned from child to man. So handsome, actually, that the Ulstermen worried that without a wife of his own, he would probably soon steal their wives and compromise their daughters. So they searched all over Ireland for a suitable wife for him, but he had already set his eyes on Emer, an exquisite young beauty he had fallen in love with. Her beauty was stunning, but so were her gentle voice, her sweet words, and her wisdom. The only problem was that her father was against the match. His older daughter, Emer's sister, was still unmarried, and it would have been improper to marry the younger daughter first. He also argued that Cú Chulainn needed to accomplish deeds worthy of Emer's perfection. In reality, he hoped to gain time. These were only excuses because his real intentions were to find a better match for his daughter, like the King of Munster. So he declared that before any marriage could be discussed, Cú Chulainn should go train in arms to Scotland. In Scotland, more precisely Dunsca, the fortress of shadows of the Isle of Skye, and its wild mountains plunging into the sea, lived Scahach, a renowned warrior woman. She was an expert fighter that no man could vanquish, and it was said that few came back alive from Dunsca, from her fortress of shadows on the island of Skye. The father of Emer hoped Cú Chulainn would not survive the ordeal and never come back. On the island of Skye, Scahach taught Cú Chulainn the arts of war, and he also made a good friend of Ferdiad, who also trained at the Fortress of Shadows. Our hero finally returned from Scotland fully trained, but again this time with no arguments left. Emer's father refused to grant his daughter's hand. This was enough. Cú Chulainn, now stronger than ever, stormed the fortress, killing everyone in his path, and fled with Emer to bring her back to Owen Maha. In the following years, Cú Chulainn had more adventures. He rescued a Scandinavian princess and avenged a friend. But when he reached 17, the time for his most famous exploit had come. Táin Bó Cúailnge, the Cattle Raid of Cooley. To the southwest of Ulster was a hostile kingdom, Connacht, and on its throne was Maeve, an ambitious and mighty warrior queen. Maeve was a personal enemy and former wife of Cú Chulainn, the King of Ulster, and for some time she had planned to attack Ulster. She coveted in particular a bull called Don Cúailnge, an extraordinary stud that could reproduce quickly and a source of prestige and wealth for its owner. But the bull belonged to Ulster, and she decided to steal it. Cú Chulainn was supposed to watch the frontier, and the simple thought of it made all Ulster men feel safe. But it happened one day that he neglected his duty to spend time with a woman. He loved Emer, but it didn't stop him from seducing others. A curse disabled all of the men of Ulster suddenly, and Maeve started her invasion by sending an army across the frontier. Cú Chulainn realized the price of his negligence and ran to the frontier on a mission to single-handedly stop the army of Connacht. His strength was formidable, but no match for an entire army, and he had to employ ruse. He invoked the right of single combat. 2 champions would fight, 1 for each side, and the battle would be won over when one side would be left without a champion. Being the only warrior for Ulster, Cú Chulainn would have to face the entire army of Maeve, but one by one. He knew he could easily win each fight, at least until he would be exhausted. But the task would be formidable, enormous, as there were thousands on the other side. The men from Connacht followed the rules of honor and couldn't deny the request. So began the first duels. Cú Chulainn won fight after fight, and days passed that turned into weeks. Queen Maeve saw her army slowly bleed, and the bull still hadn't been stolen. But Cú Chulainn also had to face another dangerous opponent while containing the army of Connacht. One day, between 2 fights, a beautiful young woman came to him and claimed to be the daughter of a king who had come to offer him love. Focused on his task and remembering why he was not on the frontier on the day of the invasion, he refused. Hearing this, the woman revealed herself as the Morrigan, the Phantom Queen, who was 1 and 3 at the same time. In revenge for the rejection she had suffered, she intervened in his next fight against yet another warrior from Connacht. She intervened under 3 different forms, first as an eel, then as a wolf, and finally as a cow. But each time Cú Chulainn wounded her, and she had to retreat. More days passed, and Cú Chulainn's strength was abandoning him. After one particularly arduous combat, he lay severely wounded and wondered if he was going to lose, leaving Ulster and its bull at the mercy of his enemies. At this moment, the god Lugh appeared to him and revealed he was his father. He also healed him and encouraged him to triumph. The night passed, and when Cú Chulainn woke up, he realized that during his sleep the army of Ulster had been attacked. The men of Ulster were still neutralized by the curse, but not the boys. The boy troop from Awin Maha, of which he was once a member, had attacked the army. The poor boys didn't stand a chance and had all been slaughtered. Seeing this, he was taken by one of his battle frenzies, the most spectacular yet. He didn't just fight faster and stronger than ever. A metamorphosis took place, and he shifted into a monstrous thing, hideous and shapeless, that attacked the entire army of Connacht at once. He killed hundreds that day, not enough to vanquish Maeve, but sufficient to shake her allies. Once he had returned to his human shape, the combat resumed. For 3 days he had to fight a grueling duel with his best friend, Ferdied, whom he had met on the Isle of Skyle. But Ferdied fought on the other side of Connacht. He finally won, but this victory only had the sad taste of his tears. During all these weeks, the curse that paralyzed the men of Ulster had slowly lost its power, and one by one, then in groups, Ulster men were converging towards the battlefield that Cú Chulainn had been controlling for so long. The final battle was near, and again, thanks to the intervention of their hero, the Ulster men were victorious. Queen Maeve retreated, and against all odds, Ulster emerged victoriously from the Cattle Raid of Cooley. More adventures awaited, and there was still the prophecy that Cú Chulainn would be at the same time forever famous for his deeds, but would die young. But not tonight. On this victory and this day of triumph from Ulster, we will leave our hero, let him rest, and maybe we will return to the rest of his miraculous life and other stories from Irish mythology another time. We have reached the end of our journey for tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. You can now let go and sleep. Or if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.